It's past 12 now, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to CFPR regular seminar. Today we have Dr. Sharon QUAH who will give a presentation on the familial care practices and needs of Southeast Asian queer migrants. I have to say that I do have a lot of overlap with Sharon. Okay, first of all, I'm anti-patriarchy. I'm also anti-racism. Okay. And of course, we believe in human rights. We believe that people should be treated fairly, right? And so I don't think I need to read all your CV, right? Sharon is no stranger to us. I think she has been quite associated in one way or another with CFPR, so we all know her very well. Also, welcome to all my students who are in my class on the SC 5205. Good to see you, and I hope you are writing a paper now. You know to listen. Okay, so without further ado, Sharon, over to you. I suppose you have like half an hour or so, and then we have time for Q&A. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
I'll just, okay. So everyone should be able to see my screen. So thank you so much, Prof. Tan, for chairing the session. Prof. Tan was my professor for Singapore Society, a subject that I took for my Master's of Applied Sociology program with NUS many years ago. As what Prof. Tan mentioned, that I'm closely associated with NUS, that I did my postdoc and research fellowship with Professor Jin Yong at ARI, Asia Research Institute, with the family cluster. So I'm really pleased and privileged to be here to present one of my recently completed research project on familial care practices and needs of Southeast Asian queer migrants. It is a little bit of departure from my previous research projects on divorce and transnational divorce. Currently, I'm moving into understanding more about queer migrants, and in this case, specifically Southeast Asian migrants. So I'll begin with my presentation now. Okay, according to Lauren Berland and Michael Warner, heteronormativity refers to the institutionalization of heterosexuality, where heterosexuality is organized and regulated to be the default, celebrated, and privileged form of sexuality. Heteronormativity is not just about the normalizing of heterosexual practices, but it defines as a sense of rightness, of a normal way of life. The proper and right thing to do as a responsible and productive member of a heteronormative society is to be in a legally married, lifelong monogamous, heterosexual, reproductive couplehood with children. I'm sure this kind of rhetoric and discourse is not unfamiliar to many Singaporeans here. Adrian Rich refers it to compulsory heterosexuality, where when you are born, you are assumed to be straight by default, and therefore the burden is on queer people to come out. Sarah Ahmed has described it as a traffic system where institutions and structures direct and incentivize and support heterosexual lives, as you can see from the education system, the policies, housing, tax rebates, and every step of your life course, institutions and structures will direct, traffic, as well as provide incentives and rewards to support heterosexual lives. And that is what heteronormativity is about. And it is so normalized that we have taken it for granted. It has seeped into our subconscious that we do not even pause to wonder, is that really a privileged form of life? Now, Judith Butler argues that the heart of the institutionalization of heterosexuality is the productive and reproductive function, the heteronormative family, enabling capitalist accumulation and hence the growth of a capitalist economy. So heteronormativity is key to capitalist accumulation. So they work hand in hand, which is why heteronormativity is so important to the growth of capitalist economy. And that's also why that different institutions and structures will continue to reinforce heteronormativity. So what that means is that this sexual behavior and family structure, crucial to the capitalist economy for its productive and reproductive function, is preferred and therefore privileged. On the flip side, as we know, that any individual or family who does not conform to the dominant framework of social life, sexual behavior, and family organization will occupy a lower position, a lower status in the hierarchical heteronormative structure, and regarded as a threat to the workability of the capitalist economy. And hence we can understand why there's so much resistance and why there's so much backlash, there's so much opposition to the rights of queer people. It's therefore no surprise that non-heteronormative families would face various forms of exclusion from public goods as a way to, as a punitive form, as well as to discourage people from veering off that straight, widely celebrated path of heteronormativity. And also, it's also important to highlight that non-heteronormative families do include straight people as well. For example, people who are divorced. So any families that don't fit into that heterosexual couplehood, lifelong monogamous couplehood that reproduce children will also face all kinds of exclusion from public goods. Now, there has been a rich body of literature investigating the impact of heteronormativity on queer individuals and families who have been regarded as having transgressed the nationalistic heteronormative model of sexuality, sexual behavior, and family arrangement. Now, joining these studies on queer individuals from Southeast Asian region, my paper examined the workings or the impact of heteronormativity on Southeast Asian queer migrants. Now, to clarify, I refer queer to individuals self-identify as gender, sex, and sexual diverse. By Southeast Asian queer migrants, I refer to gender, sex, and sexuality diverse people who have immigrated out of a Southeast Asian country. Now, for this paper, to provide the context, Southeast Asian countries refer to the 10 ASEAN countries: Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Myanmar, and Brunei. And as context, right, countries in the Southeast region are hardly uniform, so I'm not trying to generalize or to assume that we could adequately represent the diverse historical context, the political ideologies and regimes, the legal and governance frameworks, economic and wealth indexes, and social cultural values and environments. Now, while there are wide variations in marriage trends across the region and within each country, heterosexual marriage is commonly constructed and institutionalized as a significant milestone marking the transition to adulthood, fulfillment of familial obligations, observation of filial piety and religious teachings, and the entry point of setting up a family and reproducing children. Heterosexual marriage is also the gateway to enjoying public good sources and opportunities reserved for legally married couples with children. Those who do not fit within the heteronormative framework face a multitude of challenges and obstacles in their everyday life. Now, for queer individuals in the region, same-sex marriage is disallowed in 9 out of 10 ASEAN countries. Only Vietnam has lifted the ban, though discrimination against LGBT people remain persistent. Singapore, Malaysia, and Myanmar persist in retaining British colonial law criminalizing sex between two men. In Brunei, homosexuality is punishable by death penalty based on the Sharia's law. In Thailand, Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, there is reported evidence of varying degree of queerphobia and discrimination against, and also lack of anti-discrimination protection of gender, sex, and sexuality diverse populations. Against this contextual backdrop, the paper is interested to examine queer immigration out of the Southeast Asian region and ask after how the workings of heteronormativity affect Southeast Asian queer migration biographies. Specifically, it investigates how heteronormative structures persist in shaping their familiar care practices within their queer chosen families in the whole society and transnationally with their family of origin in the home country. The paper reflects on and discusses the tensions and entangled intimacies the Southeast Asian queer migrants in the sample experience, and the paper also explores the care strategies they develop to negotiate the tug of war between competing care burdens. It shows how they remain implicated in the political economy of heteronormativity through their care practices, despite having moved away to transgress the heteronormative family model to pursue a queer existence and household. Now, the self-identifications presented by my respondents include lesbian, lesbian butch, gay, bisexual, demisexual, pansexual, grey sexual, asexual, intersex, gender non-binary, genderqueer, transgender, transmasculine, and panromantic. I'll be using the pronoun they to refer to all my respondents in this paper. The sample of 15 respondents share a common characteristics. They are queer migrants who have immigrated out of a Southeast Asian country. 6 migrated to Australia, 4 to US, 1 to Canada, 1 to UK, 1 to New Zealand, and 1 to Singapore. Now, all 15 respondents have moved west, a direction towards wealthier countries that they perceive to be relatively more accepting of their gender and sexual multiplicities than their home country. Their movement is in line with general global queer migration trends. Queer migrants move to countries deemed more progressive, indexed through, for instance, the legalization of same-sex marriage, recognition of civil unions, and provision of welfare benefits to non-normative families. 20 out of 29 countries with legal recognition of same-sex marriage are in Western Europe, North America, and the Oceania regions. The 20 countries such as the US, Canada, UK, Germany, France, Denmark, Australia, and New Zealand are also economically developed countries, and therefore they make very desirable countries of destination for many queer migrants escaping from their less wealthy home country that criminalizes and stigmatizes non-normative relationships. The study's findings are not meant to be representative of queer migrants from Southeast Asia, but provides ethnographic insights into the multiple and diverse migration biographies of queer participants from Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand. As you can see that the sample size is small, it's meant to be a pilot study. Nevertheless, the interviews are in depth. It was spent over a couple of hours speaking to these migrant respondents. Now, I will now go on to speak on the findings that I've collected from this pilot project. After migrating to a relatively more queer, hospitable country, the respondents of this study enjoyed relatively more space and opportunities to form their queer household and develop queer familial care practices. One such respondent was Phoebe, a Singaporean Chinese cisgender woman in their 30s, identified as lesbian butch. Phoebe and their lesbian partner decided to move out of their home environment, and they are both registered and occupation highly desired by their country of destination. They individually found nursing jobs in their city of destination and make use of the skilled migration pathway to immigrate. They got married when marriage equality was instated on 9 December 2017 in Australia. Phoebe revealed that they have also started executing their plan to have a baby. They have found a sperm donor and decided that Phoebe's partner would receive the donated sperm at the fertility clinic, and if successful in conceiving, will carry the baby. Access to legal rights, medical facilities, and government subsidies permits the imagination of starting a queer family and rearing children in their queer household. Having said that, their queer parenthood aspirations involving diagnosis, purchase of sperms, and medical checks have up to that point cost Phoebe and their partner about 5,000 Australian dollars. This would not have been possible if they were not in a gainfully employed middle class and highly educated position. It is not just the cisgender queer women in the sample who have set their baby plans in motion after migration. QUAH, the Malaysian Chinese cisgender gay men in their late 20s, also had plans to start a family with their New Zealander Thai gay man partner. QUAH's partner's Thai-Chinese family, also living in New Zealand, has been very accepting of their same-sex de facto union and was fully supportive of their child-rearing plans. QUAH's parents, on the other hand, were not as supportive of their queer self and relationship. QUAH has since taken on the self-preservation route by terminating direct communication with them for the past 2 years. QUAH continued to worry about their parents' health and well-being, and they tried to find out about their parents through their sibling, feel guilty about not fulfilling filial piety, and was plagued with self-doubts. What is noteworthy here is that Sing-Huat's life goal to be a parent was fully supported by their partner and their partner's Thai-Chinese heteronormative family. Another new life-affirming familial care practice that took place besides queer parenthood is also queer marriage, which I will speak on slightly later. Now, upon analysis of the hegemonic structures in the narrative accounts of Phoebe and Sing-Huat, I argue that queer parenthood like Phoebe and unknowingly and inevitably implicate themselves in the cultural, political, and economic reproduction of heteronormativity. Through investing money and resources in the family reproduction industry, they leverage upon the infrastructures already set up and well-oiled to reproduce middle-class heteronormative families. They become unavoidably involved in sophisticated reproductive systems of heteronormativity, involving parties not linked to global fertility enterprises, transnational surrogacy businesses, national population policies and welfare structures, and local caregiving networks. Their participation in queer parenthood ironically placed them as actors in the political economy of heteronormativity. Besides pursuing queer parenthood, queer migrants also seek to access marriage equality rights to get married and take roots in the country of destination with their spouse as permanent residents. However, what this study has observed is that by getting married and securing permanent residency is another way where queer migrants inescapably get implicated in the heteronormative structures. Ling, a Vietnamese cisgender woman lesbian in their 20s, living in Australia with their married spouse, also a Vietnamese cisgender woman lesbian, were in the process of applying for PR as a married couple and striving towards a more stable future in Australia as a queer household. The dependence visa and permanent residency application process required Ling and their partner to make themselves intelligible and desirable to the heteronormative borders control and immigration system. Getting married is setting up a home and living together and demonstrating productivity and integration potential and capabilities by acquiring an acceptable level of English language proficiency, obtaining skill recognition, securing employment, and achieve financial stability were some of the work queer migrants like Ling and their partner must perform to fit within the local heteronormative framework of citizenship and immigration regimes. This process did not come cheap. Ling explained they have spent close to 10,000 Australian dollars thus far and were nowhere close to obtaining PR. There are other costs too that have significant bearings on Ling's health, as shown in this quote. It was not just Ling who was carrying all the burdens of working towards a more stable queer existence and future. Prior to immigration, Ling's partner held a bachelor degree in banking and finance and worked as per in Vietnam. After migration, they found themselves unemployed and had to obtain a certain level of English language proficiency before being able to enter the local workforce and gaining the points needed for their joint PR, points-based application. Efforts by Ling, Sing-Huat, and Phoebe, as we can see, and other respondents of the study to build their queer family reveal that queer migrants continue to be actors in the political economy of heteronormativity, despite their best attempts to transcend the heteronormative model by forming their queer household. Ironically, in order to live out their queer family life, they found themselves having to first translate their queer policies and care practices into a language that speaks to the heteronormative structures and in the process continue to reinforce the very dominant system they seek to transgress. Another that demonstrates the impact of heteronormativity in the respondents' queer migration biographies is the transnational care work they perform for their family of origin back in the home country. This narrative by Queenie, a Singaporean Chinese cisgender bisexual woman researcher located in the US, provides important insights into the care burdens single queer children carry. Queer children, Queenie, especially those who have not disclosed their non-dominant gender identity and sexual orientation to their parents, commonly find themselves perceived as single, unmarried, and assumed to be more readily available to provide financial and practical support as compared to their legally married heterosexual siblings. Unmarried queer children's needs for acquiring financial stability, gaining home ownership, setting up a family, and planning for retirement are often invisible or not regarded with similar importance as compared to their heterosexual counterparts. Now, this remains the case even when they have formed their own queer household and have gotten legally married or enter a civil union in countries that permit same-sex marriage. Now, there are a few reasons for this. One is that queer individuals may not be or willing to come out and disclose their queer identity and partnership to their family for fear of queer phobia. This consequently renders their practices and needs unknown to their biological family, and they are therefore assumed to be single and therefore more readily available to provide care support. Even when they openly live out their queer life and queer partnership, their care practices and needs may still not be regarded with the same weight as their heterosexual counterparts, since their queer identity and partnership are not considered legitimate in their homes and therefore not taken seriously by their family. So that's the second reason why they're often regarded as single, and why their own needs are not, or their own care needs and practices are rendered invisible. Now, the third reason for that is that in some instances, unaccepting family members passive-aggressively ignore and disregard their queer relationship and associated care practices and needs as a deliberate display of disavowal of their queer existence. Now, similar to Queenie's care work for her biological family, other single queer children in the sample continue to provide financial support to their family back in their home country even after migration. In Southeast Asian region, it is a common familiar practice for adult children to demonstrate filial piety and reciprocity by looking after their aging parents, specifically in the form of giving them a monthly allowance once they enter the workforce. Often it is not the amount of monthly allowance that matters, but rather it is about demonstrating commitment to their duty of care towards their elders. One key site emerged from Queenie's account is that their continual care work is a result of the workings of heteronormativity. Queenie's sister, being in a legally married household, is perceived to have more legitimate family responsibilities and needs, while Queenie in their queer couplehood is treated as being located outside of a heteronormative framework, and their care needs and practices rendered invisible. Now, Queenie's transnational care work for biological families in the home country in turn contributes directly to the survival and sustenance of heteronormative families, therefore reinforcing the structures of heteronormativity. Queenie's transnational care work reviews the political economy of heteronormativity here at play. The queer migrants in the sample also perform other forms of care work to sustain the heteronormative family they were born into and grew up with. They make routine phone calls, video calls, they send regular text messages for annual trips and send gifts. These practices involve a significant amount of emotion work. Many Singaporean Chinese in their 20s identify as gender questioning and demisexual or asexual, moved to Canada for their postgraduate studies and stayed on after finding employment upon graduation. Throughout their residence in Canada, Mingi performed significant amount of invisible care emotion work, particularly in managing their mother's moods and emotional well-being. So you can read the quote here. As observed in the accounts of Mingi and several other Southeast Asian respondents, these single queer migrants continue to provide emotional support to their parents and siblings in distress, often acted as the mediator to resolve conflicts among family members, and even organize household affairs and errands such as grocery and meal delivery, cleaning services, transport pickup, and medical appointments whenever needed. Once again, it goes to show that queer children may have left home and their own home country to seek a queer existence and form their own queer household, but still bear the multiple burdens of supporting and caring for their heteronormative family. Now, what is important here and should not be missed is that these Southeast Asian queer migrants' involvement in the political economy of heteronormativity. Crosby and Jacobson explained that the state ideology of familialism a primary demand of liberal capitalism requires that family members care for one another instead of turning to the state for care, and thereby relieving the state of such economic expenditures for the care of the populations. This is a global common trend for many neoliberal states. Though the queer migrant respondents have left home and immigrated, they were far from abandoning their familiar ties and responsibilities. Collectively, their transnational financial and emotional remittance is significant in maintaining heteronormative families in the home country. By supporting their heteronormative family through financial and emotional care work, they are implicitly maintaining the life and reproduction of heteronormative families, and therefore, in turn, supporting the productivity and overall economy of the home country. Now, in spite of their sacrifices and contributions, they are usually not formally and widely recognized as contributing and reproductive or productive members due to their queer migrant identities and locations outside of heteronormative framework as compared to their heterosexual counterparts. Now, as migrants, they are often categorized as quitters. As queer individuals, they have also been criminalized and labeled as sexually deviant and unproductive members. So such categorization of non-conformity therefore legitimizes the deprivation of privileges and the exclusion from public goods, resources, and opportunities. Now, using the same neoliberal logic, many modern states used to endorse the reproduction of heteronormative family in nationalistic discourse. I argue that queer individuals should not be punished in any way, since they are no less productive and responsible in keeping heteronormative families surviving and thriving, as can be seen in the findings of this project. In fact, they should be recognized for carrying a heavier care load to make up for the care gap that their heteronormative counterparts could not fulfill as a result of their own nuclear families' care burdens. But even though I'm using the same language of the neoliberal logic, I must clarify here that I'm not supportive of the capitalist economy and its demands and its categorization of value of human lives based on neoliberal markers. I'm simply borrowing their language to argue that anyone who do not fit neatly within the heteronormative framework should not be seen as unproductive citizens, as we can see in these findings that they are in fact carrying a heavier care load to make up for the care gap that their heteronormative counterparts could not fulfill in many cases. So besides tracking their contributions, it's also vital to document the financial emotional cost to these queer migrant adult children and the extent of debilitation they have to come to bear to support their heteronormative families in the home country. They're caught up in the conundrum to disavow heteronormativity by pursuing a queer self and household, but at the same time continue to reinforce heteronormativity by taking on care work to sustain their family of origin, and relieving of their heterosexual married siblings from elder care work, or even supporting their siblings' heteronormative families. The competing burdens of caring for their family back home and pursuing a queer existence come to bear on their already challenging queer migrant lives. Besides financial applications, the toll on their physical and mental health is also noticeable in the queer migrant accounts of this study. Now, what is remarkable about some of the respondents' self and mutual care strategy is that they managed to create queer care communities post-migration, as what Kath Weston has conceptualized about chosen families more than 3 decades ago. These Southeast Asian queer migrants have engaged in queer family making and found a wider community of mutual care. Some of them found their queer community of care through local queer migrant and interest groups. The respondents' dense web of care serve as a protective and defensive shield from heteronormativity, from heteronormative and capitalist demands. Their dynamic and creative forms of kinship and care with other queer and non-queer, non-Black kin in the local community reflects a mundane collective of resistance against heteronormativity in ways they could manage and at the same time require for their own queer individual. At this point, I will conclude here. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Sharon, you are right on time, half an hour. Okay, I'm sure there are questions, but maybe let me ask one first, okay? I noticed that nowadays we used to have the term like LGBTQ, right?
Yeah.
So given your definition, can I say that Q is actually equals to all the rest, everyone else?
I think that different groups of queer people will have different attachment to the alphabets and to different ways of identification. In my paper, I would refer them to gender, sex, and sexuality diverse people. In this case, I use queer as a short form, also to clarify that they are not just queer by self-identification, but also they are queering. And in this case, queering, if you look at the genealogy of queer theory, right, it is about challenging and interrogating normativity. So theoretically and in practice, they kind of gel together, which is why I use the identification as queer. But I wouldn't say that it is now a standard or uniform definition of LGBTQI people. Some queer individuals will still feel that they should be represented by the alphabets, but increasingly we're moving to the general term of gender, sex, and sexuality diverse so that we can be more inclusive, so that no alphabets feel left out in that representation.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof. Tan, for the question.
Yeah. Okay, another question I have is that you mentioned that queer migrants tend to gravitate towards the West, right, where they are a lot more queer friendly. But my sense is that actually the US is actually becoming more right wing and therefore not so friendly towards let's say transgender in particular.
Yes, thanks, Prof. Tan. So when I mention about queer hospitable, right, what I mean is really that they have provision for same-sex marriage. There's recognition of civil rights, civil union, de facto union. They also have provisions, policies, welfare provisions to recognize non-normative families. So that does not necessarily only include queer families, but it could be single parents, could be divorced families. So they do have certain provisions. But having said that, it is not true as well. I agree with you. It's not true that there's no queerphobia, there's no transphobia, there's no homophobia. In fact, the backlash is actually stronger when you push for liberation, when you push for equal recognition. The backlash can be even worse than in other countries. So the backlash is really bad. But I think that the idea of moving west and in inverted commas is really they think that they are moving towards country relatively more queer hospitable, where they could still have a little bit of bigger space to register their marriage, to be able to maybe hold hands along the street without being arrested, without being worried that it will be punishable by death. So it's just relatively more bigger space, but it is not true that it is a utopia or it's a perfect place. Not at all. In fact, the backlash can be quite dangerous too.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question, but I think I will start asking the audience to ask question, right? Vincent, your hand is up. Can you ask your question? Vincent?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Vincent.
Just let me turn on my video first.
Yeah.
Actually,
face,
who should put up her hand first?
Never mind, you start first. Okay.
Yeah,
we'll get to her.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose my question is this: in collecting your data, have you encountered a situation where you know what people say and what people do is different, right?
Sure.
So have you encountered a situation where the family of origin actually says that they accept the queer individual, but in practice, actually they don't, because when it comes to say caring and all, as you say, the queer individual still has to subscribe to the heteronormative structures and so on. So I say I accept, but in practice, in my behaviors and so on, I still treat you like you are single,
Yeah, definitely.
Do you see that
there's a lot of
occurring?
contradictions. Yes, I agree with you. Thanks, Vincent, for the question. There are a lot of contradictions, and they are not even linear. The progression is not linear, and it's also not stagnant. The family members can change their mind after a decade of seemingly acceptance, and then they feel they could feel pressure from their relatives, and then they change their mind. Their disposition can change. So I would say that for queer individuals, and in this case, my queer migrant respondents, it is an ongoing process of having to always constantly negotiate the contradictions and tension between their own queer family that they're trying to set up. They're trying to allocate resources to also manage that balance of making sure that they take care of their family back home, especially their elderly parents. And being caught in between is something that they constantly have to manage, to balance in terms of the emotions. That could be jealousy, insecurity on both sides. And it is it's not straightforward at all. And also with life events, and with the past 2 years of COVID, a lot of family dynamics have changed significantly as well, not being able to see each other. So that you can see that there's a lot of turmoil, and it's really tough managing it. So it's true that they can change their mind, and it's not always straightforward. They can not just say that I accept and then they don't accept in behavior. They could also say that I don't accept, but in terms of behavior, they are very welcoming. They still, allow you to be included in all the family gatherings. So it's not straightforward. And in fact, a lot of some of the respondents' families talk about how they will not sit down and have like a come out conversation with their family. Sometimes if you don't say the acceptance level is higher, if you force them to sit down and have that difficult conversation, sometimes it's even more awkward for everybody. Yeah.
I suppose it's on one hand it's accepting, but on the other hand they may say, but filial piety is non-negotiable. So then the different weights assigned to different things can also make it a bit complicated.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Vincent. I think that to add to that is that the queer migrant respondent I talked to who do provide that financial care and emotional care, they are very, very willing to fulfill that filial piety or to fulfill that familial responsibilities. It's not that they do it grudgingly, but what I was trying to argue in my paper is that then you see that the remittance in terms of financial remittance and emotion remittance performed by these queer migrants overseas are often invisible, but they are doing so much to support the heteronormative structures, ironically, back home and support the economy. So this is largely unseen and invisible. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the surface to, for people to understand that actually they're still doing so much for their family back home and to support the economy back home.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Vincent. Thank you.
Okay, Hushu, sorry for not asking you first.
Hello, Hushu.
Hi, no worries. Thank you, Sharon, for your talk. Good to see you. I have two questions. The first question is, when you talked about the research context, you mentioned the Southeast Asian countries, they do differ in terms of the legal accommodations to LGBT rights, right? And I wonder if the origin or the country of origin makes any difference in their in the challenges they face and how they negotiate their family relationships, how they are the expectation of them in terms of these filial piety responsibilities. My second question is, I'm really quite intrigued by your finding on how they basically the expectation of providing care and the remittance is really high on your respondents because they don't conform to the heterosexual expectations of their family members. I wonder if there is a gender difference, like if your respondent is a son in the family versus if the respondent is a daughter in the family. Usually women are expected to provide emotional support. And my impression from some literature on the internal migrants in China is that when the daughters are single, they are really expected to send their to give their salaries, much of their salaries to their parents to keep. In the old days, maybe things have changed in the 1990s and early 2000s. But sons, single sons, they have more freedom to keep their salaries for themselves. So so this is kind of the motivation why I thought of this second. Thank you.
Thank you, Hushu. Very, very good questions. Thank you. Yeah, your second question, I would like to address it first because it was also raised at another platform that I share these findings. I agree with you, and I wrote that in my paper, which I didn't cover in the presentation, that it is very similar how unmarried women, unmarried daughters have been found to bear a greater care burdens to their elderly parents in terms of whether it's financial or whether it is practical care responsibilities. It is similar. So I do note in my research that the queer daughters have to bear a greater burden in terms of care work, whether it's financial or whether it is the emotional care work. Having said that, I do have a few male respondents who also remit money and also did a lot of emotional care work. But more significantly are the queer mothers who do a lot more. I mean, the queer daughters who do a lot more. And I agree with you that there's that trend that reflects how unmarried single daughters are seen to be more available to do that care work among my respondents. As for your first question, whether the country of origin shapes matters in how their familial care practices are shaped. I think that what I notice is that if the family members are migrated with the respondents to that country of destination, I see the difference between that then family members who are still in their country of origin. The differences is there more so than the differences between among the ASEAN countries. The only difference I could tell is that for Singapore and Malaysia, who are former British colonies that still have the colonial law of criminalizing sex between two men, the impetus, of course, to move out is greater because the queer phobia is in these countries are more noticeable. In the respondents I spoke with, Vietnam and the Philippines, and Thailand, they didn't mention so much in terms of queer phobia back in their home country, but they do note that queer phobia could be observed not from the state, but among their family members, even though that on the surface, it looks like in Thailand or in Vietnam that it is seemingly more queer friendly, but among the relatives, among the family members, among parents, it is still not widely acceptable, and there's still a lot of pressure for them to, get married in a legally recognized heterosexual marriage. Yeah, thank you, Hushu, for your questions.
Your turn.
Hello,
hi, Ling, and thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Actually, I have a question about the like a beginning or the part that before the migration, and so I'm very curious about like how those queer migrants communicate with their family about their intentions and motivations of migration, whether or not they will confide that they are moving for like their this low acceptance in the whole society, in the society of origin, and how that like variations in communication may influence this their family connections, relationships, as well as these expectations of care from these left behind families, right? And so, for example, if these families like know for sure that this like queer migrant, they are migrate because they want to pursue their individualistic freedom, and in a way they may feel like betrayed or abandoned, and perceive them to be selfish, and so like estrange them further and cut up the connections and so on. And so yeah, I'm wondering that whether or not there is a mechanism like that's been happening at the beginning of the migration journey.
So yeah, if I answer your if I understand your question correctly, you're wondering about whether these respondents communicate their intent to their family.
Why?
Clearly, like, Okay. In many cases of my respondents, they migrate not specifically that for queer reasons, and because the fact that we migrate, it could be for a variety of reasons, and most of the time you need legitimate reasons when you migrate, right? That it is for to pursue your studies, so it's on the education pathway, or for a job, so there is for economic pathway, skill migration pathway. So very few people. In my case, in my study, nobody has gone on the queer asylum pathway. So therefore, you don't need to even specify very clearly that it is for queer migration. But of course, personally, they know that they need to go out in order to be able to pursue a queer existence. Some of them, of course, already disclose their sexuality or their gender identity to their family members, and then therefore it is clear to them. But in most cases of my respondents, they have not, and they don't have to, and also because the level of acceptance is low, and therefore they just say that I'm pursuing my studies and I'm staying on. And even if the family members know that they have set up a queer household, some of them accept, some of them no, straight no, and therefore in fact they stop communicating for years. Yeah, so there are cases like that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Veronica, you have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation.
Hi, Veronica.
Well, I also sent a message in the chat, but that's just in relation to Hushu's point.
Okay.
I think when sons come out as gays, family members expect them to do more labor also. Of the very feminized expectations. But my question is more onto the findings. One of the findings that you discuss is about the being single as a burden to these queer migrants, right? But is it specific to queer? Because I'm just trying to think about it. That is like related also to the marital status. Let's say heterosexual migrant workers go to work, and if they are single, expectations. But then if they get married in the middle of migrating, or they come back to get married, then the expectation get lower, right? So that's one. If that's specific to queer. And another one is you mentioned you interviewed someone who moved to Singapore. So can you elaborate why that participant is different, right? Western society. So
Thank you, Veronica. So in this case, Singapore is seen as the West, right? So when I talk about the West, it is not really how we think about the countries in the Western hemisphere or Western part of the world. In this case, the inverted comma West is like countries that seem to be wealthier. So from Malaysia, Singapore, there's a perception that we are a wealthier country indexed by wealth accumulation, the ranking of the country. So in this particular case for this respondent, they were trying to move to a wealthier country, and also it is important to know that there is also despite the fact that we have the colonial relic of 377A, there is also some platforms for bigger space for queer foreignerity. In this particular case for this respondent, they found their own queer space in a dance group, right? So by participating with this dance interest group, they felt a great sense of belonging and acceptance, and also an improvement in economic well-being, and also the mere fact of moving away from your familiar home environment, that already gives you that kind of bigger space where you can just, explore your queer existence and feel that there is less pressure for yourself, especially for your family members who have to come out with a narrative to their relatives. So that in that way is sparing their family members from having to construct their narrative that they have to present to their family. So that's the context, which I thought was really interesting, that I wanted to include in this study, that idea of moving west, because within the region, people always think that it is uniform, but it's highly diverse and is a regional hierarchy, right? That Singapore is often seen as this attractive country or destination, not just for regional queer people, but also especially for lower income people who move to this. And another project that I do on transnational migrant women, this is Singapore is a very popular country or destination to attract transnational marriage migrants. So that is to explain that the idea of moving west is also this construct, that whole idea of west-east thing, binary construct. And your other question about the feminization of gay people, I agree with you that after coming out as gay, right, they are often seen as more feminized, of how queer people are always designated to the feminine. And I have some of my respondents, gay respondents, male gay respondents, who do a lot of emotional care work. As you can see in the case of one of the quotes that's included in this presentation, that they do so much care work in terms of counseling both sets of parents, mediating between them whenever there's a conflict. There's another question that you brought up. I forgot, what was that before?
Yeah, about the burden that single queer migrants are experiencing. I was just wondering if that's specific to being queer, or that is because of the marital status.
Oh,
yeah.
See, the thing is that they may have already gotten married or even registered as a de facto union in their country of destination. But because in Singapore, they might know that in their own home country, the relatives might distantly know that they are registered. But because in their own home countries, they're not legitimate, they're not seen as legitimate. So they will always be seen as single, as less important. So that's the problem, right? And it is also not that these family members deliberately want to disavow their queer existence or queer partnership, but it's just how they have been socialized in an environment where that the only legitimate relationship and the most important, most sacred relationship is a heterosexual marriage with children that that the society should support. So there is this subtle subtext here that okay, I don't know what you do over there. You do what you want to do, but it's not. I can't say that to my relatives, or subconsciously I can't really recognize because it's not legitimate in my own in our own context. Yeah. So whether they are single or not, that's not even the point. The point is that it is never really legitimized or seen as equal. Thank you, Veronica, for your question. These are really, really, really helpful questions. I really appreciate it.
We still have time for at least one more question. Anyone else? Come on.
Hi, Jean.
Hi, can I ask a question? I see another hand.
Yes, please. No, I haven't. Do I see another hand?
Mukul Prasad? There was another hand.
Yes, but I can wait.
No,
Okay.
no, go ahead. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, two of you then.
Because this, okay. So my question may not be directly related to the topic that you presented, which is a very excellent presentation and great research being done. And this is more because of your bio that I saw in the poster, that you want to build communities and things like that. And the question then is basically, what can academic researchers do other than just publish and researching towards building those communities, or towards getting those equal rights, as Prof. Tan talked about in the beginning? So, for example, this public debate in Singapore about Section 377 repeal has been going on forever, right? But you've never probably seen academics from, let's say, NUS or things like that talk out in support or against it. So, what do you think academics can do towards building those communities?
Thank you, Moko, for the excellent question. Yeah, academics are often seen as just working in our ivory tower and publish and then don't know whether people will read or not. But I really think that your question is excellent. Yeah, what else can we do, right, as academics, that we are just researching, collecting this really important data? How do we then enact changes in the society? I do believe in the great value of our work, not just that we are publishing and researching, but we do teach in class and we do presentations like that. And conversation, changing conversation is such a dynamic form of activism that we sometimes do not give equal importance. I think that by talking about this in class, by having students in our midst, and by even sharing this publicly in public conversations. Conversations are such game changer that when we change conversation, when we start to come out with new ideas, thinking about, hey, I didn't think about heteronormativity this way. I didn't think about queer migrants being located overseas, having to carry the burdens. I didn't know that they are implicated in the workings of heteronormativity, even though they don't want to, because every part of the societies are just, we've embedded with all kinds of heteronormative structures. By having these ideas and then changing conversations when we speak with our students, our colleagues, our families, even at dinner conversations, these are huge power, and these are an excellent way of activism, besides just going out there and standing at Hong Ling Park or making a statement. I think that this kind of activism on the ground is really, really powerful, and ideas get changed and changed among the younger generations. I think that's what I can do, because students in my class always ask, that we teach them all these horrible things in life, and there's so many horrible things, as sociologists, we expose all the inequalities and injustices, and they come to class feeling like, oh my goodness, I carry so much burden. What can I do now? And that's why I tell them that I'm not expecting you to go out to protest now, to do these things. Of course, if you feel compelled to protest, that's your prerogative. But small little things that we can do in our own position of power, whether as a child, as a parent, as a teacher, as a government worker, as the CEO of the company, as we spread these ideas and change words in our position of power, we can enact changes. So as academics, I think this is what I'm trying to do within my power of influence, which is to talk about it in class, to make my research more translatable to general audience, so that people can pick it up, to keep doing talks and work with activist organizations. And that's I think the least I can do.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for that question.
Basically it's about doing public sociology, that as sociologists, as academic, right? I mean, we can speak up against inequality, injustice, and things like that, right? Even if you are not out there protesting, right, in front of Parliament or any of these places. Okay, Jean, you have the last word.
Okay,
last
Ling,
question at least.
It's great to see you and hear your new research.
So happy to see you too, Jean.
Yeah, exciting, promising research direction. So you talked about the political economy of heteronormativity of the queer migrant by sustaining the transnational care economy. Here I was thinking of how are they different from the other migrants, because other migrants also send money and back to their parents and make phone calls, and oftentimes actually they do contribute more by sending more money, because they spend less time taking care of other the instrumental care duties at home. And so that's something that's quite common and well documented in the literature too. So I'm thinking that addressing this political economy of this phenomenon, you talk a lot about how families respond, how families members respond. I wonder if you would want to develop more on how the society level, at the society level, how the policy in both developing and receiving the origin countries are different, and how they play a role in this process to make this queer migrant different from the other migrants thing. I think a society norm and policies back home and in their new home those are very important in this dialogue. And second point is that you also talked about how these families keep these heteronormative families intact back home. And this, I think, again, this is more, I think a step further is that perhaps how their behavior of moving out and still sustaining this family care behavior might change the heteronormative family norms or behaviors back home. that's maybe another sort of nuances that can be explored a bit, rather than just, you know, keep these families back home intact. I think maybe there's something more there to be talk about.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. So I argue that they're actually the same. I think that the reason why I wanted to showcase this is to show that they are often rendered invisible. So I wanted to highlight that the visibility of what they are doing. I wanted to bring to the surface that they are the same. They're the same. These queer migrants are doing it, as what you mentioned. I wasn't trying to show a difference, but I was trying to show that they are the same and they're performing equally important role in financial emotion remittance of care work to families back, heteronormative societies back home. And I wanted to show that, I wanted to track their contributions that are in no way less equal or less substantial. In fact, it could be more, could be, you know, significant. And therefore to recognize their contribution, to recognize that they shouldn't be seen as quitters who want their left, or they shouldn't be seen as just this unproductive, irresponsible members because they are queer, right? And therefore kind of legitimize the exclusion, their exclusion from public goods back in the home country. So when I use the same neoliberal logic to argue that they are actually making the same contribution, if not more, because they're trying to, you know, keep up, trying to fill the care gap that their heterosexual counterpart could not fulfill, then in fact we should recognize the contribution. But of course, I'm also uncomfortable to use the neoliberal logic or language throughout to say that therefore we should recognize them. I'm actually trying to argue that we should not punish them just because they are seen as, you know, non-heteronormative or non-productive or non-reproductive, by showing that they are very productive and reproductive in keeping these families back home surviving and thriving. We should recognize their contribution. So they are definitely the same as other heterosexual queer heterosexual migrants who are doing the same thing. So I wanted to highlight their visibility, trying to track their contribution. So to me, they are the same, and that it is important now for their home society to recognize their contributions. For example, that in the Philippines, it's well known that the contribution by the domestic helpers in keeping Philippines economy thriving and surviving, that contribution is being well recognized, right? That we do need this, the Philippines do need the domestic helpers to support the economy. Likewise here, I think it's important to recognize that queer migrants, whichever country they have migrated out of, they are also supporting the economy very well by performing this emotional and financial care work, and then not seen as less productive or less responsible. So I think I wanted to argue that. So tracking that contribution is very important to bring it to the surface to our conversation. And also to address the second one is that, yes, it's more than just keeping them intact. In fact, they contribute to these families back home significantly, sometimes even contribute to the siblings' families by, you know, providing for education fees, by giving monthly allowance even to their siblings' families, because the siblings are also not doing well. But I do agree with you that there is really definitely room for a bigger study to really document the actual remittance amount made by these queer migrants. A quantitative study will be great to track the actual remittance amount, whether it's financial or emotional remittance, to then really highlight the kind of contribution that they have made to supporting their home countries' economies back home.
And yet there's challenges in for them to do this.
Yes,
to carry out this
this
caregiving, and you know, the fact that they move out in the first place means the economy, the society, in a macro level, at a much broader level, created this environment and structure for them to make this more difficult. So I just meant that you bring in the society level factors in more in this conversation.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Sharon. I think it is for me to make an announcement that on April 22nd, there's a seminar by Prof. Lynette Chua from the Faculty of Law, NUS, and her topic is the return of the deadbeat dad vulnerable legalities and parental maintenance laws in Taiwan. So do show up for that as well. So okay, time's up, and thank you very much, Sharon, for spending this time with us, and thank you for all the good questions that we have. I hope that we are all be more appreciative of the challenges and the inequality and also the unfairness, right? That affects people with a different identity. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you very much again, and see you in the next seminar. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Prof. Tan, for sharing. Thank you, everyone, for your
Thank you.
questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.